A miss is as good as a mile. Be less than an inch behind the other car and you'll still lose. And here's my list of the finishes that nearly baffled the timing gear. Senna vs Mansell, 1986 Spanish Grand Prix, Jerez, 0.014 seconds. It was 1986. Prost was at McLaren, Mansell at Williams, Senna making his mark at Lotus. Jerez was only the second Grand Prix of the season, but all were driving as if the title was up for grabs there and then. The racing was stellar, a three-way battle for the lead. Prost faded in the latter stages to eventually finish 21 seconds adrift. Mansell, having pitted with 10 laps to go, proceeded to demolish Senna's 20-second lead at a rate of 2 seconds per lap. It all came down to the final hairpin. Mansell, having taken yards out of Senna under braking, rounded the final corner buried under the Lotus's wing. He then slipstreamed up to the finishing straight and dashed out to take the flag. But it wasn't quite enough. Senna, his car's tyres practically flapping, held on by just over 1/100th of a second. Gethin vs Peterson, 1971 Italian Grand Prix at Monza, 0.01 seconds. Back in the days before motorsport timing gear recorded to more than 2 decimal places, Monza was a fearsome place, and 1971 was the last year before chicanes were installed to reduce the speeds. This race was, and would remain for over 30 years, the fastest F1 race of all, won at an average speed of 150.754 miles per hour. Slipstreaming ruled that September day, and the top 5 were masters at it. The lead changed almost every lap as they pulled away from the pack. On the final lap, Peter Gethin came from 4th to steal the lead from Ronnie Peterson by 1/100th of a second. Perhaps even more surprisingly, the top 4 was separated by just 0.18 seconds. Craven vs Busch, 2003 Carolina Dodge Dealers 400, Darlington Raceway, 0.0026 seconds. There's no quarter given in NASCAR, and like so many races, the 2003 Carolina Dodge Dealers 400 had been a war of attrition. Dale Earnhardt Jr. had led for most of it, but behind him pairs of cars had collided and fallen by the wayside. All except one pair. Towards the end it boiled down to a 2-horse race, veteran Ricky Craven against punk youngster Kurt Busch. Craven led with 1 lap to go. Busch tapped him and snuck underneath. Craven looked to be gapped, but through the final 2 corners Busch looked loose, allowing Craven to pass him on the inside, then pop back up, rubbing panels all the way down the straight. They crossed the line together in more ways than one. 6 years later, it was voted NASCAR's Race of the Decade. Look it up on YouTube. It's worth it for the commentary alone. Gomez vs Lloyd, 2007 Chicagoland 100 Indy Pro Series, Chicagoland. 0.0005 seconds. Guinness World Records recognises this as the closest margin of victory in any car race, and it didn't even happen in a senior race series. Indy Lights is the feeder series for IndyCar, basically a gang of ferocious young upstarts wanting to make a good impression. At the Chicagoland circuit, notorious for its close finishes, they got to prove themselves. Alex Lloyd, a 23-year-old Brit, was head-to-head with American Logan Gomez, just 19 on the final lap. Both were racing for the same team, but team orders clearly didn't apply. Lloyd tried to go round the outside, and he looked like he'd made it stick, only for Gomez to get a better drive onto the final straight. View the finish from one side, it looks like Lloyd has won. From the other, the win belongs to Gomez. Should have called it a dead heat, really. Plato vs Chilton, 2009 Brands Hatch British Touring Car Championship, 0.015 seconds. Technically speaking, this isn't the closest BTCC finish of all time. In 2008, Tom Onslow Cole beat Gordon Shedden by 0.009 seconds, also at Brands Hatch, but they were racing for second until Tom Chilton was excluded from the final results. So we're going to fast forward a year and remain at Brands Hatch and keep Tom Chilton as one of the protagonists. The other is Jason Plato. It's a balls-out race over the last few laps. Chilton leading in his Ford Focus, Plato hassling him in his Chevrolet Lacetti, and getting closer and closer and closer. But until the very last corner, it doesn't look like Plato will make it past. Somehow, he manages to gain hard yards where he shouldn't be able to, and make a straight dash for the line. Plato, by the width of his front bumper, is through for the win, and I bet he was pleased he hadn't knocked it off this time. Dempsey vs Chavez, 2013 Firestone Freedom 100, Indianapolis, 0.0026 seconds. Irishman Peter Dempsey hadn't had a stellar career path. He'd done stints in Formula BMW and Formula Ford in the UK before winding up in the States and making his way into the Indy Light Series for a couple of stuttering seasons. Then came the 24th of May 2013. At the start of the last lap, Dempsey looks to be nowhere. It's all happening up front, where three cars, having run line astern, start to spread out. So intent are Gabi Chavez, Carlos Munoz and Sage Karam on their own battle that they leave a door open high on the outside. Through the final turn, Dempsey slipstreams up behind Chavez, makes for the gap, and the four cars cross the line abreast. Dempsey wins by at best 3 inches, at 220 miles an hour. His first win, his team's first win, and just plain spectacular to watch. Elias versus Rossi, 2006 Portuguese Grand Prix, Estoril, 0.002 seconds. At the last count, Valentino Rossi has won 67 MotoGP races, and Tony Elias has only won a single race in his entire career, but it was a bit of a humdinger. Portugal 2006, and Elias was running third going into the last lap on his Honda, but with his contract likely to expire at the end of the season, he was riding like a man possessed. He dived down the inside of Rossi and Kenny Roberts Jr. at turn 1 and made the move stick. However, Rossi pounced on Elias's mistake at the chicane to take the lead, and that, you'd assume, would be that. But Elias wasn't done yet. He shadowed Rossi and kept it pinned through the final turns, drafting him onto the straight, and the rest is stuff of MotoGP legend. Elias edging Rossi by just 0.002 of a second. Castrones versus Dixon, 2008 Indy 300 Chicagoland, 0.0033 seconds. The timing screen showed Scott Dixon had won. The timing screen was wrong. Apparently when IndyCar finishes at less than 0.006 seconds, the leader at the start of the last lap is awarded victory until photo evidence can be properly consulted. The result was then overturned and Helio Castrones was awarded victory by a margin that equated to a fraction over a foot. The news was in fact broken to a predictably overexcited Castrones by a reporter on live TV. All relatively standard fare, even if it was at the time the second closest finish in IndyCar history. What made it properly remarkable was that Castrones had started stock last of the 28 cars and fought his way through for a fairy tale victory. But of course, don't feel too sorry for Scott Dixon, because while Castrones won the 300-mile race, Dixon himself took the championship, his second place finish on that day, enough to secure him the 2008 IndyCar title. Edwards versus Johnson, 2012 Ford NHRA Thunder Valley Nationals, Bristol Motor Speedway, 0.000 seconds. Usually in drag races, the time gaps are huge, as one of the cars often explodes into a great ball of flame or turns right into the barriers straight after launch. But on this occasion, both cars made it to the quarter-mile line, at precisely the same moment. It's thought to be the closest finished in any sport, both crossing the line in exactly 6.679 seconds at over 206 miles an hour. Alan Johnson had the faster time down the quarter mile at 6.661 seconds, but his slower reaction off the line by 13 thousandths of a second meant Mike Edwards emerged the winner. The organiser claimed the timing gear could measure to a millionth of a second, but chose not to share the final decimal places. The final gap between them, less than an inch.